Why is this CBS anchor fawning over Marco Rubio in what should otherwise be an unbiased news segment? Well, that's the new status quo under Bari Weiss's leadership. So, Tony Dokoupil, for those who don't know, has been a longtime anchor with the broadcast network, but he was recently promoted to the slot that was once held by journalism legend Walter Cronkite. He's also married to MS Now's Katie Tur, so he's familiar to a lot of people in this space. But as of late, you've probably heard of him because of what's going on at CBS overall, with new owner Bari Weiss dramatically shifting the ideological leanings of the channel. She's also made really unpopular decisions, like censoring a 60 Minutes episode about CCOT, the El Salvadoran prison. Now, people were able to see that episode because it was leaked in Canada and broadcast, which allowed it to be spread around the US. But meanwhile, Bari Weiss's CBS has been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. And over the past couple days, Dokoupil's new position as this anchor role has raised a lot of scrutiny over him fawning over Trump officials, basically leaning into propaganda that celebrates Trump's administration. Let's take a look. So this clip that we're about to watch is how Dokoupil ended his broadcast last night. And it's pretty shocking, especially if you've watched CBS News in the past before Bari Weiss's takeover.
Finally tonight, and only in America, the many lives and many jobs of Marco Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants and a former Florida senator. He's now the face of U.S. foreign policy and President Trump's point man on Venezuela, all in addition to his roles as Secretary of State, interim national security advisor, and acting national archivist and USAID chief. Whatever you think of his politics, you got to admit it's an impressive resume. And now AI memes have added to that portfolio, casting Secretary Rubio as the new governor of Minnesota, the new Shah of Iran, the prime minister of Greenland, the new manager of Manchester United, the head of Hilton Hotels, and highest of high honors of all, the new Michelin man. Now, back in real life, of course, these memes may not add up to much, but for Rubio's hometown fans, which are many around here in Miami, it is a sign of how Florida, once an American punchline, has become a leader on the world stage. Marco Rubio, we salute you. You're the ultimate Florida man.
This is so weird, and this is not how a CBS broadcast should sound at all. It sounds more like a press clip for a promotional campaign for Marco Rubio to get reelected or something. Now, there's a couple of hints here of where Dokoupil's mindset may be at. For one thing, he's a Florida native, as he often emphasizes in his reporting, but that shouldn't cross over to a bias in endorsing or, as he put it, saluting any of his local politicians. Also, there's no mention here of all of the controversial things happening right now under Marco Rubio's leadership. Instead, he's showing these AI images that have no reflection of reality and occupying valuable airtime to, again, just fawn over and essentially suck up to this member of the Trump administration. And when you start to put this into context with the way that Dokoupil has handled this position so far, it starts to become a little clearer about maybe what he's here to do. So let's dig into it a little more. So the way that Dokoupil and Bari Weiss have both talked about shifting CBS News is supposedly in a way that more American viewers will appreciate. They've cited declining trust in news, and they're very obviously hoping to appeal to a new sort of conservative audience, but it's caused them to get in disagreements with their own journalists and people outside of their sphere. And the responses to those disagreements have been something to behold. So here's the way that Dokoupil responded to Andy Cohen of Bravo when he questioned the fact that Tony said that journalists, were listening too much to experts. Andy said, listening too much to experts, WTF? And Dokoupil responded, Andy, I love ya, but can you really not think of any examples where academic advice turned out narrow or bad? I basically gave you a multiple choice list. It's possible you were living outside or above the issues I mentioned. Now, this comment ratio kind of speaks for itself. Tony got 7 likes and Andy got 152, but the next comment is even more shocking. So like I mentioned, Tony Dokoupil now occupies the spot that once belonged to journalism legend Walter Cronkite. And this person on Instagram commented, I grew up on Cronkite. Too bad CBS has lost its Tiffany shine, but good luck to you anyway. Dokoupil responds, What did you love most about him? I can promise you we'll be more accountable and more transparent than Cronkite or anyone else of his era. Now, this is a pretty shocking declaration, and you would need to come with a lot of firepower to the scene if you wanted to back something up like this. There are entire journalism schools named after Walter Cronkite. So for Dokoupil to act like he's more transparent and more accountable is a huge claim to make. And we've seen the opposite come to fruition. That Marco Rubio clip is just the tip of the iceberg. Dokoupil and CBS as a whole have taken this really frightening, sort of alarming turn toward either outright seeming to endorse Trump's administration and its policies, or just fail to ask them really interrogative questions. That's the kind of thing a journalist focused on accountability would actually do, not fawning over government officials or letting them steer the narrative by asking softball questions, but rather trying to get to the bottom of it, especially in this era where Americans are reasonably so concerned about what's happening at the federal level and are receiving so little transparency around what's actually going on. So another example of this is Dokoupil's recent interview with Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. This was a perfect example of those kinds of softball questions that I was telling you about. And in the aftermath of this interview, the CBS News account was tweeting out clips and quotes that were really favorable in Hegseth's direction instead of performing the role of transparency and accountability that Dokoupil claimed he was going to uphold. So for example, we have this tweet from CBS Evening News that says, quoting Pete Hegseth, "It's the exact opposite," Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, contrasting the Maduro operation in Venezuela with the Iraq War nearly 20 years ago. He said the raid was strategic and benefits both Americans and Venezuelans while reinforcing U.S. influence. And it continues on from there. Now, this is the kind of tweet, interview, and presentation of the news that essentially just positions the Trump administration as being in the right and fails to mention really important context that could give news audiences the information they need to evaluate what's really happening here. For example, they say that it benefits both Americans and Venezuelans. How? How is that possible? We now know that there were dozens of civilian casualties in Venezuela as a result of the mission, and how would this possibly benefit Americans? These are the types of questions that CBS and Dokoupil should be asking and answering, but instead they're just choosing to do these puff pieces about administration officials. Here's another example. A tweet from CBS Evening News that says, quote, "I saw the best of America. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth praised U.S. troops involved in the raid that led to the capture of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, telling CBS News' Tony Dokoupil it was one of the most complex and successful joint special operations missions ever carried out." Again, where is the evidence for that claim? This just reads like a glorified press release, which is really disturbing considering that these are military operations taken without congressional informing or approval that have caused numerous civilian casualties and are extremely unpopular. Someone on Blue Sky had a great take about this that I wanted to highlight. So this post says, "Nightmarish. CBS News is now running straight state propaganda. They handed Hegseth all 3 segments and are now tweeting flattering sound bites." Exactly. Now, this isn't the only kind of embarrassing example of Dokoupil's tenure in this role so far. On his very first broadcast, there was this really weird series of flubs that occurred live on air. And I almost wonder if that might have something to do with the fact that Bari Weiss, who's now running this newsroom, has essentially zero experience in this type of broadcast position. But beyond the speculation, let's take a look at what happened.
This is all that much, which does raise the question of how exactly it helps the United States, if it helps the United States at all. What is it actually about? Well, if you zoom out a bit, you can maybe see the outlines of an answer. For decades, Russia, China, and Iran have been building a presence in Venezuela, a base of power and influence in the hemisphere. With Maduro now out, that base of power and influence could be out too. All right, to other news, as you just heard from Jill. Well, to other news now, to Governor Walz. No, we're going to do Mark Kelly. First day, big problems here. Are we going to Kelly here, or are we going to go to Jonah Kaplan?
Now, as somebody who has worked in the broadcast news space before, I can attest to the fact that mistakes do happen. It's just particularly embarrassing in light of Dokoupil comparing himself to someone like Walter Cronkite and saying they're going to do a much better job than CBS has in the past. The reality is pretty starkly different. Now, in addition to politics coverage, there's kind of an interesting focus appearing here that I alluded to earlier. So, this document was leaked to a media reporter, and it shows what was supposed to be covered during week 1 of Dokoupil's show. As you can see in these notes, as I said earlier, he's reporting live from Miami, and there was this huge focus on having him do things like party with Pitbull and play soccer with David Beckham, and even Tony does spring break, going to a boat raft up party or a University of Miami party. Now, as fun as that sounds, it bears questioning, why is CBS News focusing so many of its resources into these kinds of puff pieces and lifestyle stuff that nobody really even cares about? It begs the question, is this an abdication of CBS's duty to be reporting on serious news that actually affects Americans? We'll have to continue seeing what happens moving forward. But even in terms of what's happening on the ground at CBS, there's been more reporting that shows staffers' discontent with this new direction. So we have Justin Barragono reporting here. A CBS News staffer told me this after Tony Dokoupil kicked off his CBS Evening News tenure tonight with a lengthy Pete Hegseth interview. If this is what Barry and Tony's CBS Evening News is going to look like, then we may as well just call ourselves Trump administration state TV. Pathetic. That's a scalding statement from a reporter with boots on the ground at CBS, and it's kind of a dark sign of what the future of the network may look like under Weiss's leadership. But hey, that might be intentional. At her outlet, The Free Press, which she started after leaving the New York Times as an opinion writer, Bari Weiss has used her position and her power and her access to wealth and influence mainly to boost the status quo. And the wealthy ownership of CBS may have an interest in focusing more on things like puff pieces and not holding politicians accountable. But I have a feeling that's also not going to be great for the business as a whole, which is why I think independent journalism is so important now more than ever. We desperately need voices who aren't under corporate control, who aren't focusing on puff pieces and letting administrative officials slide, people who are actually going to hold power to account and ask the questions and deliver the reporting that audiences need. So here's one more reaction that I thought would be a great place to end on. It says, CBS is a complete disaster, unfixable. Weiss is a clueless hack, and Tony Dokoupil is a dangerously ambitious journalist who will do anything to serve the overlords. But MAGA is laughing at him, and they're not going to watch CBS. Neither is anyone else. And I think that's the saddest part of this story. Like I said earlier, this new slant of trying to appeal to conservatives, it's not exactly going to boost the viewership of CBS, and it's going to erode the audience that they already had. Now, apart from Dokoupil and Weiss, there are still tons of amazing journalists working there, and they deserve to be in a newsroom that actually supports the meaning of journalism at all. So I hope that viewers keep that in mind as they navigate the media landscape moving forward, prioritizing journalism that actually does the work.